The first splash of summer wasn't what Daniel Mercer had expected. Standing in his backyard, droplets of water still clinging to his shoulders after his inaugural swim in the newly installed pool, Daniel locked eyes with a woman glaring at him from over the fence. Her perfectly highlighted bob cut caught the afternoon sun as she pursed her lips in obvious disapproval. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice carrying that distinctive tone that signals trouble is brewing. "Did you get a permit for that monstrosity?" Daniel took a deep breath, trying to maintain the sense of peace he felt just moments before. After 6 months of saving, planning, and construction, his backyard oasis was finally complete. A modest in-ground pool that represented years of hard work and the fulfillment of a promise to his kids after the divorce. "Yes, ma'am," he replied politely, reaching for his towel. "Everything's up to code and approved by the city. Would you like to see the paperwork?" The woman, who Daniel would soon learn was Elaine Pritchard from 3 houses down, scoffed as if he'd suggested something obscene. "Well, I certainly hope so, because my husband is very particular about neighborhood regulations." Something in her tone made Daniel's stomach tighten. It wasn't just the words, but the implicit threat beneath them. "I'm sure everything's in order," Daniel said, forcing a smile. "I'm Daniel, by the way. Just moved in about a month ago." "I know exactly who you are," Elaine replied, making no attempt to introduce herself. "And I know you didn't clear this with the HOA board." Daniel's smile faltered. "There is no HOA in this neighborhood. I specifically checked before buying." Elaine's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Maybe not officially, but we have standards here. And my husband enforces them." As if on cue, a muscular man appeared behind Elaine, resting a proprietary hand on her shoulder. He wore civilian clothes, but something about his stance screamed authority. The gold badge clipped to his belt confirmed Daniel's suspicions before the man even spoke. "Problem here, honey?" he asked, his eyes cold as they assessed Daniel. "Officer Pritchard," the man introduced himself without extending a hand. "Seems we got some concerns about your new addition." Daniel felt a chill that had nothing to do with his damp skin. "Everything's permitted and inspected. I'd be happy to show you the documentation." Officer Pritchard smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, we'll definitely be taking a look at all that. Very thoroughly. You see, I take the safety of this neighborhood very seriously." Daniel nodded slowly, understanding dawning. This wasn't about permits or safety. This was about power. The Pritchards had appointed themselves the unofficial rulers of the street, and Daniel's pool had somehow violated their sense of control. Looking forward to it, Daniel replied evenly, refusing to be intimidated despite the knot forming in his stomach. As the couple retreated, Daniel heard Elaine's stage whisper, "Wait until he finds out about the noise complaints we'll be filing every single weekend." Daniel watched them go, the joy of his new pool temporarily overshadowed. He hadn't moved to this modest neighborhood looking for trouble, quite the opposite. After his divorce, he'd sought a peaceful place to rebuild his life with his 2 children on weekends. Now it seemed he'd unwittingly stumbled into a territorial dispute with the neighborhood's self-appointed royalty. Little did he know that this brief encounter would escalate into a suburban battle that would test his patience, resolve, and ultimately reveal just how far some people would go to maintain their illusion of control and how spectacularly it could backfire. The first noise complaint arrived exactly as Elaine had promised, the very next weekend. Daniel was hosting his children, 10-year-old Emma and 8-year-old Liam, for their scheduled visit. Their delighted squeals as they splashed in the pool had barely lasted an hour when a patrol car rolled up in front of Daniel's modest ranch home. The officer wasn't Pritchard, but a young rookie who looked embarrassed to be there. "Got a noise complaint, sir," he said, glancing at the clearly reasonable volume of the children playing. "Just doing my rounds." Daniel noticed Elaine watching from her porch 3 houses down, arms crossed in smug satisfaction. He nodded politely to the officer. "Of course, we'll try to keep it down." The visits became a regular occurrence, different officers each time, but always for the same reason. After the 3rd weekend in a row, Daniel installed security cameras around his property. His instincts told him this wasn't going to end with noise complaints. He was right. One Tuesday evening, Daniel returned from work to find a bright orange citation taped to his front door. The official-looking document claimed his pool enclosure violated city code and demanded immediate rectification or face daily fines of $250. Daniel frowned, examining his newly installed fence. He had meticulously researched city requirements and even paid extra for a contractor who specialized in pool enclosures. Everything was up to specification. 6-foot fence, self-closing gates with child-proof latches, alarms on doors leading from the house to the pool area. The citation was signed by Enforcement Officer R. Pritchard. "Convenient," Daniel muttered, pulling out his phone to take photos of both the citation and his fully compliant enclosure. That night, Daniel called his sister Maya, who happened to be an attorney specializing in property law 1 county over. This is harassment, Dan, Maya said after hearing the full story, and possibly abuse of power if he's using his position to conduct unofficial inspections or influence other officers. What should I do? Daniel asked, watching through his kitchen window as a patrol car drove slowly past his house for the second time that evening. Document everything. And I mean everything, Maya advised. Get copies of your approved permits, take dated photos of your pool and fence, keep a log of every interaction with the Pritchards or any officers who show up, and install security cameras if you haven't already. Done that, Daniel said. Good. And find out who Pritchard's superior is. If this continues, you may need to file a formal complaint. The following weekend, Daniel had just finished explaining the situation to his next-door neighbor, Mrs. Garcia, an elderly widow who had lived in the neighborhood for 30 years, when Officer Pritchard himself appeared at Daniel's fence. Spreading rumors about me? Pritchard asked, his voice dangerously quiet as Mrs. Garcia hurried back to her own yard. Just having a neighborly chat, Daniel replied evenly, acutely aware of the security camera recording from his eaves. Pritchard stepped closer, using his height to loom over Daniel. Let me make something clear, Mercer. This neighborhood was peaceful before you and your noisy pool showed up. If you think your fancy permits protect you, think again. I've been on the force for 15 years. I know every inspector and code enforcer in this county. Daniel met his gaze. Is that a threat, Officer Pritchard? It's a reality check, Pritchard replied with a cold smile. You've got two choices here. Either drain that pool and fill it in, or deal with the consequences of being on my radar. Trust me, you don't want the latter. As Pritchard walked away, Daniel's phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Garcia. Don't let him intimidate you. The Pritchards have driven away 3 families in the past 2 years. Someone needs to stand up to them. Daniel looked down at his phone, then back at Pritchard's retreating figure. The officer paused to have a word with another neighbor, who immediately glanced nervously in Daniel's direction. It was becoming clear this wasn't just about a pool. This was about control, power, and a system that the Pritchards had manipulated to maintain their grip on the neighborhood. And somehow, Daniel's simple backyard oasis had become the battleground for something much larger. That evening, as Daniel sat on his back porch, listening to the gentle lapping of the pool water, he made a decision. He wouldn't be filling his pool, and he wouldn't be intimidated into leaving. If Officer Pritchard wanted a war, he was going to discover that not everyone backs down from a bully, even one with a badge. Daniel's kitchen had never been so crowded. What had started as a conversation with Mrs. Garcia had evolved into an impromptu neighborhood meeting. 7 residents sat around his table, speaking in hushed tones despite being inside, as if Officer Pritchard might have the place bugged. He threatened to have my son's car towed because it was parked too close to the fire hydrant, said Tom Chen, who lived across the street. It was at least 15 feet away. When I measured it to prove him wrong, I got 3 parking tickets the next week. Elaine reported my garden gnomes as obscene lawn ornaments, added Sofia Rodriguez, rolling her eyes. The city inspector who came out just looked confused and apologized for wasting my time. As each neighbor shared their story, a pattern emerged. The Pritchards had systematically bullied the entire neighborhood, using Robert's position on the force to intimidate anyone who didn't conform to their vision of the perfect community. Why hasn't anyone reported him? Daniel asked, refilling coffee cups. The neighbors exchanged uncomfortable glances. 2 years ago, Marcus Johnson tried, Mrs. Garcia said quietly. He filed a formal complaint after Robert issued bogus citations for his basketball hoop. The next thing you know, Marcus was getting pulled over every day on his way to work. His teenage son, too. They moved away within a month. That's textbook intimidation, Daniel replied, his jaw tightening, and potentially serious misconduct. Which is why we've all just adapted, said Tom. It's easier to live by their rules than fight it. Daniel considered this, looking around at his neighbors, good people who just wanted to live their lives in peace. What if we fought together instead of individually? The idea hung in the air, both terrifying and tempting. I've been documenting everything, Daniel continued, pulling out a folder. The false citations, the patrol cars circling my house, the confrontations. My sister's a lawyer, she says with enough evidence from multiple households, we could build a case of harassment and abuse of power. And then what? Asked Sophia. Even if something came of it, we'd still have to live here with them. Unless we didn't, Daniel said thoughtfully. Has anyone ever looked into whether their own property is fully compliant? The question sparked something. By the end of the evening, the neighbors have formed what they jokingly called the Pool Party Coalition. Each agreed to document their interactions with the Pritchards, while Daniel and Mrs. Garcia quietly began researching local ordinances, property records, and police department policies. What they discovered was interesting indeed. On Saturday afternoon, Daniel's children were enjoying their pool time when the familiar sound of a patrol car pulling up drew his attention. This time, however, it was different. Captain Edwards, Robert Pritchard's superior, stepped out, accompanied by an uncomfortable-looking Pritchard. "Mr. Mercer," the captain said formally, "Officer Pritchard here has something to say to you." Pritchard looked like he was swallowing glass. "The department has reviewed your pool and safety measures. Everything appears to be in compliance. The citations have been rescinded." Captain Edwards gave Pritchard a pointed look. And Pritchard continued stiffly, "There will be no further noise complaints filed regarding normal daytime pool activities." Daniel maintained a neutral expression despite his surprise. "Thank you, officers. I appreciate that." After they left, Daniel's phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Garcia. "The complaint we filed worked. Did you see his face?" But Daniel sensed that there was more to this sudden reversal than their formal complaint. The captain's presence suggested higher-level involvement, and Pritchard's forced apology indicated he'd been overruled by someone with significant authority. That evening, as his children slept peacefully upstairs, Daniel received an anonymous email with a subject line that made his heart race. "Pritchard property records, inconsistencies found." Attacks were documents showing that the Pritchards' immaculate three-bedroom home had an unpermitted sunroom addition, and most interestingly, their pristine front yard extended nearly 4 feet beyond their actual property line, encroaching on city land. The sender's message was simple. "Thought your pool party coalition might find this useful. Not everyone in the department appreciates how Officer Pritchard conducts himself." Daniel sat back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. The tide was turning. The Pritchards had created an ecosystem of fear through intimidation and abuse of power, but now that very system was beginning to work against them. The question was how to use this information not just for revenge, but for lasting change in the neighborhood. The neighborhood barbecue at Daniel's house was in full swing. Children splashed in the pool under the watchful eyes of parents lounging in lawn chairs. The smell of grilled burgers filled the air, and laughter, genuine, uninhibited laughter, echoed through the backyard for the first time in what the neighbors said had been years. Mrs. Garcia arrived with her famous potato salad and a twinkle in her eye. "They're watching," she whispered to Daniel as she set down her dish. Sure enough, from the vantage point of their front porch 3 houses down, Elaine Pritchard stood with arms crossed, her husband beside her with a pair of binoculars not so subtly trained on the gathering. "Let them," Daniel replied, flipping a burger. "We're not breaking any laws." The last 2 weeks had been surprisingly peaceful. No patrol cars, no citations, no confrontations. To the casual observer, it might have seemed the Pritchards had moved on to other targets, but Daniel and the coalition knew better. This was the calm before the storm. Their research had yielded more than just the property line encroachment. They discovered that Robert Pritchard had been the subject of 3 internal affairs investigations, all mysteriously closed without findings. They found evidence that Elaine had been using Robert's police database access to research new neighbors, a serious violation of department policy. Most damning of all, they'd learned that the Pritchards' perfect lawn, a neighborhood standard against which all others were judged, violated the county's water restriction ordinances with its hidden, non-permitted irrigation system tapping directly into the municipal water supply without a meter. The coalition had strategically shared these findings with Captain Edwards through an anonymous email account. The captain's response had been prompt, an acknowledgement of receipt and a promise to look into these serious allegations. Now they waited, enjoying this moment of respite while preparing for the inevitable backlash. It came sooner than expected. As the barbecue wound down and families began to disperse, Elaine Pritchard marched purposefully across the lawns, separating their houses, her husband trailing behind with the stiff posture of someone barely containing his rage. "Having a nice party, are we?" Elaine's voice cut through the pleasant atmosphere like a siren. "Interesting how you didn't extend an invitation to everyone in the neighborhood." Daniel turned to face her, conscious of the children still present and the security cameras recording. "It was organized rather spontaneously, Elaine. You're welcome to join us for the next one." "How thoughtful," she replied, her smile poisonous. "Though I doubt there will be a next one. Not after the health department receives an anonymous tip about your pool's sanitization levels." Mrs. Garcia stepped forward, her small frame somehow imposing. "The pool's fine, Elaine. We're all swimming in it with no problems." For now, Elaine snapped. Things change. Accidents happen. The threat hung in the air, causing several parents to instinctively move closer to their children. Robert Pritchard finally spoke, his voice carrying the artificial calm of someone used to intimidating others. "You folks should know that investigating an officer of the law can have serious consequences. Some might even call it harassment." Daniel met his gaze steadily. "Nobody's investigating anyone, Officer Pritchard. We're just being good neighbors, looking out for our community's compliance with local ordinances. Isn't that what you've always encouraged?" The subtle reference to their findings wasn't lost on Pritchard, whose face darkened. "You have no idea who you're dealing with, Mercer." Actually, Daniel replied calmly, I think we all know exactly who we're dealing with now. As the Pritchards retreated, hurling thinly veiled threats about code violations and noise complaints, Tom Chen sidled up beside Daniel. You know they're going to retaliate, he murmured. Daniel nodded, watching the couple storm back to their house. They will, but not with citations or noise complaints this time. They know we're organized now. They'll try something more direct. Like what? I don't know, Daniel admitted. But whatever it is, we'll be ready. That night, after everyone had gone home and his children were safely tucked into bed, Daniel received a text message from an unknown number. Watch your back, pool boy. Not everyone in uniform is as honorable as you might hope. Almost simultaneously, his security system alerted him to movement in the backyard. The night vision camera revealed a shadowy figure at the pool's edge, pouring something from a container before quickly retreating over the fence. Daniel called the police immediately, not the local precinct, but the county sheriff's department, and then made another call to Captain Edwards' direct line, which Mrs. Garcia had discreetly provided. The storm had arrived faster and more dangerous than any of them had anticipated. But unlike the previous families who had faced the Pritchards' wrath alone, Daniel had something they had lacked: a united neighborhood, documented evidence, and most importantly, powerful allies within the very system the Pritchards had exploited for years. As he waited for the authorities to arrive, Daniel took samples from his pool where the intruder had poured the unknown substance. Whatever chemical warfare the Pritchards had just initiated wouldn't go unanswered, but neither would it be met with revenge. It would be met with justice, properly executed through the system they had corrupted for far too long. The lab results came back within 48 hours. The substance poured into Daniel's pool was industrial-grade aldehyde, 10 times the recommended concentration for residential pools. In those quantities, it could cause severe skin irritation, respiratory problems, and even chemical burns. If your children had gone swimming before you noticed, the county health inspector didn't need to finish the sentence. His grim expression said everything. Captain Edwards stood in Daniel's living room, reviewing the security footage for the third time. The figure's face wasn't clearly visible, but the build and gait were unmistakably similar to Robert Pritchard's. This goes beyond harassment, Mr. Mercer, Captain Edwards said, his voice heavy with professional disappointment. This is criminal endangerment, potentially attempted assault. Daniel nodded, still processing how far things had escalated. What happens now? We execute the search warrant, Edwards replied. The property line encroachment and water theft gave us probable cause. The security footage and lab results just expanded the scope. By noon, the neighborhood had transformed into something resembling a police procedural drama. 3 patrol cars, an unmarked detective vehicle, and a county inspector's van lined the street in front of the Pritchards' house. Neighbors watched from windows and porches as officers carried boxes of documents and electronic devices from the immaculate colonial home. Elaine Pritchard stood on her front lawn, her perfect bob disheveled for the first time in memory, shrieking about harassment and promising lawsuits against everyone involved. Robert Pritchard, by contrast, was eerily silent, his face ashen as he watched his fellow officers methodically dismantle the facade of respectability he'd built over 15 years. The search yielded more than anyone expected. Beyond evidence of the water theft and property encroachment, officers discover a meticulously kept ledger of neighborhood infractions with detailed notes on how Pritchard had addressed each situation. Some entries explicitly mentioned using police resources to research residents, falsifying citations, and coordinating with friends on the force to target specific neighbors. Most disturbing of all was a small notebook containing what appeared to be blackmail material on several city officials, compromising photos, notes about financial irregularities, and personal secrets that explain how the Pritchards had managed to escape consequences for so long. When the officers finally led Robert Pritchard away in handcuffs, charged with multiple counts including misuse of police authority, illegal access of confidential databases, utilities theft, and criminal endangerment, the neighborhood collectively held its breath. No one celebrated openly. This wasn't a moment for gloating, but rather the somber conclusion to years of quiet suffering. That evening, as news vans set up along the street and reporters attempted to interview shell-shocked residents, Daniel hosted an emergency meeting of the Pool Party Coalition in his living room. This isn't the end, he cautioned the group. Elaine is still out there, and she's more dangerous than ever now that she's cornered. And Robert has friends on the force who might not appreciate what we've done. Mrs. Garcia nodded in agreement. We need to stay vigilant, and we need to reach out to those city officials in the blackmail files. They're victims, too, and potential allies. More importantly, added Tom Chen, we need to make sure this never happens again. Not in this neighborhood, not anywhere. The coalition spent hours drafting a formal letter to the city council proposing community oversight for law enforcement, increased transparency in code enforcement, and stricter consequences for officials who abuse their positions. It wasn't just about punishing the Pritchards anymore. It was about healing a system that had allowed their behavior to flourish. As the meeting concluded, Daniel walked his neighbors to the door. Outside, the street was quieter now, the news vans having departed for the day. Across the neighborhood, lights glowed warmly in windows, and for the first time in years, there was a palpable sense of community, of neighbors looking out for one another rather than looking over their shoulders. Captain Edwards' car pulled up just as the last neighbor was leaving. He approached Daniel with a grim expression. "We have a situation," Edwards said without preamble. "Elaine Pritchard is missing, and she left a note specifically mentioning you." Daniel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. "What did it say?" Edwards hesitated before answering. "It said, he destroyed everything we built. Let's see how he likes losing something he loves." Daniel's thoughts immediately flew to his children, safely at their mother's house for the week, and then to his pool, a catalyst for everything that had transpired. "We've already stationed an officer at your ex-wife's house as a precaution," Edwards continued, noting Daniel's expression. "But I'd like to place one here as well. Whatever Elaine is planning, she's not thinking rationally." As if on cue, the lights throughout the neighborhood flickered once, twice, and then went out completely, plunging the street into darkness. In the sudden silence that followed, Daniel heard a sound that made his blood run cold, the distant but unmistakable gurgle of water rushing through pipes that should have been still. "Get everyone away from the water lines," Daniel shouted, instinctively moving toward his backyard. Captain Edwards was already calling for backup on his radio as they raced through the darkened house, guided by the beam of Edwards' flashlight. The sound of rushing water grew louder as they approached the pool area. In the dim moonlight, Daniel could make out a figure hunched near his pool equipment. Elaine Pritchard, barely recognizable, her perfect hair wild and unkempt, furiously working at something with manic determination. "Mrs. Pritchard," Edwards called out, his voice calm but authoritative. "Step away from the equipment." Elaine whirled around, and in the beam of the flashlight, her face was a mask of rage and something worse, the desperate look of someone with nothing left to lose. "You," she spat at Daniel. "You destroyed everything. Our reputation, our status, our control, Robert's career. All because you couldn't follow the rules like everyone else." Daniel took a careful step forward. "Elaine, whatever you're doing, it won't fix anything. Let's talk about this." "Talk," she laughed, a brittle sound that echoed across the water. "That's all anyone wants to do now. Talk, talk, talk. Form committees, write letters. Where was all this talking when we were maintaining standards and keeping this neighborhood respectable?" As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, Daniel could see what Elaine had done. She had bypassed the standard pool plumbing and connected a series of makeshift pipes directly to the main water line. Next to her lay several empty containers labeled with hazard symbols, industrial chemicals that should never be mixed. Captain Edwards seemed to realize the danger at the same moment. "Everyone back," he ordered, reaching for his weapon. "Mrs. Pritchard, you are creating an extremely hazardous situation. Step away from the pool equipment immediately." "It's too late," Elaine replied with eerie calm, the rage suddenly gone from her voice. "The pressure's building. You think you won, Daniel? You think exposing us solves anything? This neighborhood was perfect before you came. Perfect." In that moment, several things happened at once. Backup officers arrived at the front of the house, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Mrs. Garcia and several neighbors gathered at the fence line, drawn by the commotion. And somewhere beneath them, a water main groaned ominously under excessive pressure. "The chemicals I added will backflow into the municipal supply when the pressure equalizes," Elaine explained with the detached precision of someone who had planned meticulously. "Your pool was just the entry point. The entire neighborhood's water supply." She never finished the sentence. With a deafening crack, the jury-rigged connection between Daniel's pool equipment and the water main ruptured. A geyser of water erupted between them, knocking Elaine off her feet. Captain Edwards lunged forward, pulling her away from the torrent as more pipes began to fail, water shooting in all directions. Emergency crews arrived within minutes, securing the area and shutting off the main water valve to the neighborhood. Hazmat specialists quickly contained the chemicals before they could spread, while paramedics treated Elaine for minor injuries before taking her into custody. As dawn broke, Daniel stood with his neighbors watching city workers repair the damaged water main. The crisis had been averted. Elaine's sabotage had backfired spectacularly, literally blowing up in her face before causing any lasting contamination. "You know what the irony is?" Mrs. Garcia said, handing Daniel a cup of coffee as they surveyed the scene. Her actions actually brought the entire neighborhood together. "Look around." Daniel glanced at the impromptu community gathering that had formed. Neighbors who had barely spoken for years were now exchanging phone numbers, offering spare bathrooms until water service was restored, and organizing a cleanup effort for the affected areas. 1 month later, the neighborhood was unrecognizable, not physically, but in spirit. The Pritchard's house stood empty, a for sale sign swaying gently in the front yard. Robert Pritchard had been convicted on multiple charges and was serving time, while Elaine was undergoing court-mandated psychiatric evaluation. The Pool Party Coalition had evolved into an official neighborhood association, not the restrictive, punitive version the Pritchards had envisioned, but one focused on community support, transparency, and inclusion. Their proposal for oversight of local code enforcement had been adopted by the city council, with several other neighborhoods requesting to implement similar models. Daniel's pool had become the unofficial gathering place for community meetings, family events, and the neighborhood's first-ever summer block party. Children splashed freely without fear of noise complaints, and adults relaxed without looking over their shoulders. For